So I know we spoke a bit by email. Transparently, I haven't had a moment yet to actually look through the details, but since you're here, we could talk in person.
All righty. Absolutely. Happy to do so.
So, here's kind of like the cards that we have at our disposal. Mr. Sean McQuillan and Flop Dugong jointly were convicted for the murder of a law enforcement officer.
Hold on, Mr. Dugong here.
Correct.
The former officer in EMS from a very long time ago.
That is correct.
The same one.
Yes.
Well, it's disappointing to hear.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
He's been a member of ADMC for a minute now. In fact, I think Flop was also behind some other cop shootings at a certain point in time. But sort of forwarding a little bit. Hey, Peters, you can join us. We're just talking about the
let me finish up this processing. I'll jump in.
Yeah.
You don't have to shoot that.
So I myself have been on a number of chases with Mr. McQuillan, and internally, you know how those chases go. It is what it is. But he normally ends up getting away as a consequence of other individuals who are assisting him in, interference vehicles, pitting officers off, picking him up, getting him into another car, et cetera, et cetera. In this particular instance, we had a positive ID of Mr. Sean McQuillan by two separate officers. Later, myself, yesterday evening, driving a Dominator, coming back to him. Chase ensued until the Dominator started to smoke, after which Benny Razor, who I was able to positively ID, in his vehicle, picked up Sean McQuillan, drove off, eventually dropped him back at that same vehicle in which he got in. I monitored Mr. Razor's vehicle, and eventually, within another unit, was able to apprehend him whilst that pursuit with Mr. McQuillan continued on. And my pursuit attached while he was en route right next to the chase, about to interfere yet again for the umpteenth time. And he was placed into cuffs. While on the ground, he was very coherent. And I asked him a very specific question. Why are you helping Sean? And he notated, well, of course I am, because of the 3 warrants, one of which is the apprehension for the murder post-conviction. The question then got drawn up, and this is sort of a question I put out there because I've not really been on duty much this past year and a half. I've got other obligations with the president. So my understanding of existing charges, how charges have been developed up is pretty amateur. But the initial...
Mr. Nye, I would never consider your knowledge of the law amateur for as long as I've known you.
Well, amateur in the sense that, the penal code has changed quite a bit, so I don't know what charges now exist, what don't exist, how many buckets there are now. And so, but the inference that was sort of looming in the air was felony obstruction of justice. And I posed the question, well, why would we go with felony obstruction of justice? It doesn't fit in my mind, it doesn't fit. But when I say in my mind, I mean based on charges that used to exist, or what's sort of at hand here. And so that's where the conversation sort of sparked up. Would this not be harboring a fugitive, which was a charge that would have fit in the past, but now the question became, is it going to fit today? That's when we looked at the charge, and I sort of was on the fence with it until the discussion of nuance came into play. And let me just pull up the charge here. 30 seconds, boys. It was, oh my God. Tay! Coming in with the 20 gifted subs.
Would you like me to read it for you?
Yes, I've got it up as well, but feel free.
All right.
Charge
Whoever
it with the
knowingly
5.
harbors or conceals any prisoner wanted for a capital level offense after their escape from custody of Bolingbroke State Penitentiary or any other state correctional institution will be guilty as such.
Mm.
It would be including and not limited to providing residence for this prisoner, assisting the prisoner escape from the authorities, and or failing to notify the proper authorities of the prisoner's location if the suspect should reasonably know that the prisoner is wanted for arrest on capital level offenses.
Mm.
So it fits to a T apart from the word prisoner, right?
Well, so let's
In
break.
some instances, and the first part of this, there's two parts. Right? So you have to look at prisoner. What constitutes an actual prisoner?
Mm.
All right. And how those things are defined. I don't think we actually end up doing or defining prisoner anyway. We define a lifer. I don't think we do a prisoner. Let me just double check that.
Mm-hmm. This is really
the
good.
definition of prisoner would be a person legally committed to prison as a punishment for a crime or while awaiting trial.
Not quite. While waiting trial, you can be out on bail. You're not in custody of anyone at that point.
Yeah. So here's kind of like the way that we sort of found this fitting, and you know, we're still a bit on a Benny razor's edge here. So at the time he is in court and that gavel hits. Okay, so I'm going to admit something. I referenced outside legislation, mostly as a consequence of if it's not defined in San Andreas, I'm leaning on the colloquial, how does, you know, the United States utilize some of this verbiage, because it's the only thing to point to at that stage, right?
And I'm going to tread carefully on that because it was there's a few things that's basically an Occam's razor situation to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And as those things develop, we have left out certain things, such as rating violations as such, and I have cautioned individuals for trying to use those in the past.
Absolutely. I would not reference any outside legislation, but rather definition, mostly in absence of one existing, mostly as a talking point, right? And so from my understanding, based on, so the question came into play at the moment the conviction transpires, who's in control? Like in the courtroom, when someone is facing charges, who is he in custody of, right? And like, where is the where that's that first question. And then when the gavel hits, who is he in custody of then? And that's kind of the now, and based on and I specifically looked up when a conviction occurs in the United States, it is no longer in the hands of the law enforcement agency or the prison, but rather it is the correctional facility that has custody of them. Now, in this city, things get a little flimsy, right? Because we are either A, shipping them through local DOC, B, doing a transport with DOC to Bolingbroke Penitentiary, or bringing him to Mission Row and processing him there. So there's kind of this like very gray area of like where do things begin and where do they end? Now, if we go under the presumption that at the time of conviction, he is from that point forward a prisoner who is now in need of transportation to the correctional facility. And the question now is, where does that handoff happen? Now, obviously, based on looking at the reading here, the custody of Estabrook State Penitentiary and or other state correctional institution. Now, there's just so much room for interpretation there that I think it would be good to have this heard in court. That's kind of where I'm sitting. But I want to hear your thoughts on this. And you mentioned something about like in the past, the custody. I want you to go into your thought process because I found that
Absolutely. So, Mr. Knight, as we have in the court process, obviously is innocent until proven guilty, right? And so, in terms of the initial custody, for example, if you have a bench trial, right? And you're being tried at that point for your bench trial, you're there with the officer. Technically, you're in the custody of the officer at that point, right? So you have traffic court, you have an arrest, whatever, and they're contesting it, right?
Yeah.
They're down the cells, they yell bench trial. All right, you call up a judge, you take them over there. Are they in your custody or are they in the Department of Corrections custody when they go over there?
During the bench trial, I would say in custody of law enforcement. As a consequence of no formal charges having been pressed, and based on the dynamic of the city, is that there is no transfer of custody at that stage.
All right, well, careful there as well, because law enforcement is, they're actually technically correctional officers, all defined as law enforcement officers here. Keep that in mind.
Oh, the DOC?
Yes, they are.
Is that actually defined out as law enforcement?
Yes, they are given law enforcement. At least it was originally. I'm not sure if that's changed since.
Okay. All right.
Can I ask you a question?
You may.
So at the point of the suspect being charged guilty in the court, is he still under law enforcement or LSPD or BCSO? Or does that then fall to DOC?
Well, this is, I think, what Mr. Knight is getting at. So let me return back to this scenario, and maybe it'll give you some other light to things or ways to consider. Because I do think there's an opportunity where things can be clarified here.
Yeah.
As I go ahead, I hear your court, go ahead, deliberate, etc. You, the officer, if they're found guilty, typically take the individual back down to the holding cells, whether it be here, whether it be the courthouse, wherever that needs to be, the marshal's building, etc. Right? Do you ever have a DOC member come in, do the charges for them there? Because they haven't been officially charged yet, have they?
This is where it gets a little. He's on bail, right? He was on bail. And inherently, when you're in bail, you are still. Are you still in custody?
No. It is your own free will at that point. You're not in anybody's custody. Custody is you're providing care over that individual.
So now you're in court, right?
Correct.
And now where is the custody, right?
Well, I'll reference back to the situation as you have not been found guilty yet.
But you are not free to leave.
Correct. No, you're not. Absolutely not.
So who is providing the detainment? What is
would
keeping
still be
you
the
there?
officers, because the charges have not been proven in court yet. You have not been found guilty.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Well, okay. Yeah.
Unless you're appealing.
I agree. I think I'm curious if you are in custody of the court, and that if you were to leave the court, that would be why it would be, turn into, fleeing from court or whatever those charges may entail, after which the execution of those further charges would be handled by law enforcement.
You're not wrong with that by any means.
Yeah.
And there's a few things we have to consider. We reference back to what happens in the States, and we have to acknowledge the fact that our system is completely backwards. What happens there? You get charged, you get booked with something, you're actually then sent into prison where you await trial, right? And so you are, at that time, as you await trial in custody of the corrections, right? But that doesn't exist here, how we do this. So it becomes a little bit of a backward system that has been set up. Because you're out on bail, because these things happen where you can be free at any point before that,
Yeah.
instead of being detained until trial, we're caught with a little bit of a conundrum where I do think you have a point of clarification, but I don't think it's quite yet. I think there is an opportunity to have these heard and clarified before the judiciary, bring up your concerns and points with it, and get further clarification from everybody. Actually have it written out, because reality is we're backwards. We don't do the same things that happens in the States.
Yeah,
When
I mean,
hit that gavel,
yeah.
you all take that prisoner back either to the cells and you charge them then. And when you do all transports, the transport happens should DOC be available after the booking process has occurred. If DOC is not available, sometimes y'all do it by yourselves, right?
Yeah.
It's done by a local DOC then. The moment that occurs, in any means, whether technicality you are leaving the cell with them to give them a transport up, whether someone brings down a DOC bus, transports them up, or whether you send them through the DOC that we have here, that's to me the differentiation. But I'm one person with this. That can be interpreted many different ways.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing about this case. I think what makes this interesting is I think what we should do here, because we have some time, is to articulate out why this charge fits. And during that exercise, if we do not believe that the charge fits, we don't push the charge. In other words, if we cannot sit there and say this makes sense, unfortunately, this is a matter of vernacular, right?
Absolutely.
And a very gray area of undefinedness. I think,
but there's once again an opportunity.
Absolutely. I think the thing that has me leaning on, it does it make sense for harboring a fugitive in per title? Sure. I think the thing now is it truly fitting the existing definition? Yeah.
Correct. My personal belief, not anybody else's, not any judges. I don't believe it does.
Could you explain the why? You had mentioned how things used to work in the past, and I'm very curious about that.
No, that was how I was explaining that to you right there. That how it works in the past. That is the definition as to when those individuals are sent. There was no definition as to when they're in custody by any point.
Yeah,
I think once again you have the opportunity to define this with this. I was giving context as to what has happened or what happens in regards to where custody is established.
Are correctionals officers not the ones that normally go into the prison cells, like the courtroom cells where post conviction and
bring them
transfer
to the room, right?
It was the intention that DOC obviously serve as bailiffs. Now, in terms of the actual booking process, they do not do that. They actually, I'm not sure if you're aware, don't even have the capabilities to issue a fine to someone.
Interesting. But that's very interesting. Wait, but then how are they law enforcement officers?
Because they uphold the law and the penal code inside of the actual prison.
I see.
By definition, that still makes you a law enforcement
I
officer.
think they do now there, Bailey. That they can operate outside of Los Santos in Los Santos County now.
If the possibility, and once again, this is all depending on how things have changed, and I understand that there's proposed legislation if they are working with a marshal at that point.
I see.
They can technically be deputized to work outside of the prison there. That was the purpose of how we were establishing.
I see what he's saying.
For these individuals.
This is such a gray area.
Is there? there might be the possibility to work
Yeah.
with a marshal, and they can actually bring and usher them into it.
Mm.
Yeah, examples of that have happened, like the lifer who broke out of prison. Some DOC were deputized to help with surveillance.
The thing that is going to really help support our claim here is there was an incident with Chatterbox in the last month where a very similar situation as what was presented here took place, in which Tessa Lamb and Ember Quinn assisted in his escape post conviction, and they were both hit with harboring a fugitive. There was a secondary case that Aaron brought up that also fits this. This happens to have more backing it because I think those were murder cases. This is a murder case as well. So
Here's arrested. Do you know who presided them? If there's any sort of
that I think that's what we gotta. That's what we gotta dig up. This is
because if you
reference.
can reference those and provide that in articulation, if it does go to court, I think you use that and you lean on that heavily.
Yeah.
Because the precedent had been set if that is the case.
Yes. Yes.
And maybe once I'll do some digging to see who it was, see if they're still around. It was not on my behalf. If they are, we ask about it. If not, well then, kind of up shit river. You understand there's been quite the turnover in the judiciary.
Oh yeah, 100%. Give me 1 sec as I take a. We should go to that. Bailey, thank you so much. We're gonna update the email chain with that information.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you.
What channel?
Thank you for your
What
time,
was your
sir.
name as well?
Channel 1 as far as we know.
Arnold Frost.
73276.
Thank you for your time.